Gisborne and Northland are the main citrus-producing regions of New Zealand. In May this year, we visited Bradley Davies on his kirikiri orchard at Satsuma harvest time.
Primarily we're citrus growers. We've got about 16 canopy hectares of Satsuma Mandarins, which are a well-known product to New Zealand consumer, and typically Japanese varieties of Satsumas. The background, parents are involved. My father was involved in horticulture in a big way and in citrus in a big way, and through the years recognised opportunities with Satsumas from the point of view of being a sought-after product, and also opportunity to possibly get a foothold in Japan as a market, as an export market for New Zealand citrus. A sort of microclimate that's recognised for, and the ability to, while it's often challenging to produce a product, it's got that little bit of extra taste. It got some characteristics that are hard to replicate in other areas. So that's, I think, why kirikiri got a name for itself for citrus. The industry typically produces about 9,000 to 10,000 tonnes of Satsuma mandarins a year over a sort of 3 to 4 month period. The growing regions being Northland and Gisborne. There are some other areas, but those are the two main growing regions. Northland produces a slightly higher volume, over 50% of that production in total, and we ourselves produce about 400 to 500 tonnes of the national volume. The same challenges that most of the sectors are facing around biosecurity risks are obviously a major. Continuing to grow market, I think we're doing a good job of that. We're growing the market share and continuing to improve the taste attributes of the product. I think that's key. So we've got to a place now where the supply-demand balance is a lot better than it used to be. So I would like to think that we're in a more stable position than we were 5 or 6 years ago. Typically up in Northland here, we're chasing the early season. We're chasing an early opportunity into Japan for a limited volume of product of very high spec, and that takes 30-odd% of the volume out of Northland to Japan. And the balance of the volume, obviously the bulk of the volume therefore is sold in the New Zealand domestic market. From an industry perspective, you're only talking about sort of 15 to 20% of export volume going offshore, so we're very reliant on the New Zealand domestic market. We monitor fruit from early in the year to see how it's tracking as far as maturity goes, see if the maturity is building on a fortnightly basis, and as we get closer to harvest we then go to sampling weekly, because you can get variation between different areas, different blocks, maturity areas. And then just prior to harvest, when we've got enough colour, we'll then start sampling by maturity area, by colour, to see how we're tracking. So we've got industry standards around brix and acid and the combined ratio of brix acid. They vary slightly between the New Zealand domestic market and the export market. So once we get close to harvest, we bring in a sample. That sample is then destructively tested to ensure that we're meeting those standards, or if we aren't, then we cannot harvest. The Japanese market chases a smaller size profile of fruit. We work on diameter measurements, so 50 to 60 millimetre fruit is their ideal. So it is a smaller profile than typically the New Zealand domestic market would be after. And that fruit has to be pretty much totally blemish free, and then an internal, it needs to have an internal brix of over 10.5 to 11, and an acid below 1.2, which gives a ratio up around 10 to 1. This is a typical tree. This has actually been harvested already. It's had 2 picks through here, so what's left here is very little in the way of fruit. You can see it's a relatively open structured tree. We have to maintain an open structure to keep on top of pest and disease. Obviously our fruit carrying wood is this light spring growth here that will carry our fruit for next year. We promote that. We prune the trees to keep them open and also remove the older material out of the trees to, again, keep on top of disease and such like. The trees are planted on a contour. The trees are up on a mound so that we're bringing any water away from the root system of the tree to the middle of the row. We're using reflective material on the ground to capture any light and heat and get it back up into the tree to improve sweetness of the fruit. And during the summer, during the early period of the year, we will deficit irrigate. So we'll actually stress the trees, such as they do with other products, grapes and the likes, to bring up the sugars. In Kerikeri here, it's quite a humid environment, so fungal pressures can be quite high. So we do have to maintain a reasonably vigilant fungicide program during the year. And then from a pest, insect pest perspective, we engage IPM's management practices. So we're monitoring levels of pests and beneficials, and making decisions based on that balance, and then using pretty much target-specific products to control pests.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.